Hello, everybody. If you haven't found a seat yet, please find a spot. We have many available still. And so good to see so many of you here today in the Sakala Theatre House. Yeah, please come and find a seat. My name is Karin Kivirehk, and I will be speaking in English today as we have many international visitors. I am very happy to say the introduction words on behalf of the Estonian Center for Contemporary Art and to welcome you all here on this dark November afternoon. We are very, very pleased to welcome in Tallinn the Mondrian Fund, the commissioner of the Dutch Pavilion, on this historical occasion of the handover of the Rietveld Pavilion to Estonia, together with a group of Dutch art professionals and art writers from the Netherlands. And we are also honored that the Deputy Ambassador of the Kingdom of Netherlands is here with us today, and also the Ambassador of Italian Republic. And the Estonian Cultural Ministry is also represented by Daniel Raudsepp, the Undersecretary of Arts. And last but not least, it is also really heartwarming to see so many local Estonian art and culture people here. So, tere tulemast teile kõigile. I will also introduce a bit the schedule of today's event. So I will soon give the word to Nadia Baird, who is editor-in-chief of the Calvert Journal, and today the moderator of the panel discussion, which soon will be starting. The discussion goes on about 1 hour, including your questions, for which we will take some time in the end. And we are also live streamed through the internet. You can watch us on YouTube and Estonian Public Broadcasting Cultural site. And there's a link to ask questions also online on Slido, and it should be now also on the screen, this link. And we will take a couple of questions from there as well in the end. After this discussion, there is the celebrating moment of the official handover of the Rietveld Pavilion. And after this, immediately the performance by artist Jüri Ojaver, which he made especially for this occasion. And Jüri, for those who don't know, he was also the artist who represented Estonia in the Venice Biennial back in 1999, when it was also the first year when CCA Estonia organized the pavilion. And after the handover and after the performance, you are all welcome to have a snack and drink offered by the number 99 cafe. So I'm once again saying huge thank yous for you all to come, and also saying hi to our viewers from the internet. So please enjoy the evening.
Is this on? Oh, yes. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Nadia Beard. I'm the editor of the Calvert Journal, and I will be moderating this panel today, and we will be looking at the question, who is representing whom at the Venice Biennale? So I'm very pleased to introduce our illustrious panel. We have Ilko van der Lingum, who is the director of the Mondrian Fund. We have Kati Ilves, who is artistic director of the European Capital of Culture Tartu 2024. We have Hendrik Volkerts, who is the curator of the International Contemporary Art Moderna Museet in Stockholm. And we have Maria Arusu, the director of the Center for Contemporary Art Estonia and also the commissioner for the Estonian Pavilion. I think we would all agree that what's happening today is quite a momentous occasion, and it's certainly very disruptive to a great Biennale tradition. I'd like to start by asking, what exactly has led to this decision? What is it about the current moment in time that we're living through that lends itself to something like this happening? And what will be the impact and the legacy of this? Can I start with you, Ilka?
Well, I'll start off with the first one. What led to this is there are multiple reasons. One is that we have a beautiful pavilion designed by a very important artist and architect from the Netherlands, Rietveld. And as a result, the stage that we have in Venice, right in the center of the Giardini, is also one that carries a lot of weight with it. And that has effect on how you present at such a platform. For us, it's not such a bad thing to step away from that heavy history and that heavy weight of the platform that is there. And to see at another place we could react differently to the pavilion, and we don't always carry Rietveld with us as the extra artist in the presentation in Venice Biennale. At the same time, also we find ourselves every time that we are there, we are discussing the selection of countries that is represented in the Giardini, the heart of the Venice Biennale, and how that represents power structures from the past. We discuss it, we have an opinion about it, but we never do much about it. So we said, well, let's give ourselves a bit of a break from the Giardini for ourselves, and at the same time, let's do something about that power relations in the Giardini itself. Let's see what happens if another country steps in and takes our platform there. So that was originally where we started off as a Dutch pavilion. And then, obviously, we had to sort of see which country we would then invite to take the Rietveld pavilion. And there are many options, but a lot of those options are not real options. You also don't want to give any country a sort of toxic present, where you give them a stage right in the center of the Biennale, but they can't give shape to it. So we looked for a country for which a place in the Giardini would not necessarily be an option under normal circumstances, because simply they would not be on the list to get in. And at the same time could also make it worth their while, put something there that also adds something to the Giardini. And that's how we ended up with Estonia.
And what do you think the legacy will be for the Dutch? So in 4 years' time, when there is another, or in 2 years' time rather, when there is another Biennale, do you think this will have a lasting impact? Will you return to the Giardini, or do you think something else might take shape?
Well, we've been allowed by great exception to leave our pavilion once by the organization of the Biennale. We had to promise that we would go back. But if we go back in 2 years' time, something will have changed. We'll have had a presentation somewhere else that will have done something. We don't know yet what it is, and I'm going to assume it's a very positive thing. But when we come back to the Rietveld Pavilion, we'll look at the pavilion in a different light. We'll deal with it differently. It will have a different kind of weight to it again. For us, it's also a fresh start. So I'm hoping also it will do more than just that. It will do more for the Biennale itself, and maybe it will lead to changes in the future as well. But that's something for the future.
And it's nice how the relationship between Estonia and the Netherlands, precisely because of this, has been allowed to deepen. Why has it taken a moment like this to tighten the cultural bond between both countries?
Well, I can maybe start the answer here, but then I would say the bond was already there. That it didn't come out of the blue, that this cultural relationship has happened in individual basis, like many Estonian graphic designers study in Netherlands. Artists study there. Katja Novitskova, who was presented in 2017, was actually made her career in Amsterdam and Netherlands. And with Mondrian, we have had like long-lasting relationship and collaboration. So I think it was already building up year by year. And now to have this beautiful momentum of being in the biennial, being guests in their pavilion, taking this challenge, because for us it's always, we have been these nomads moving around from the 10th century palazzo to shipyard to now this amazing Rietveld building. So for us it's a new challenge, but also how we see it, we don't want to it's not like the end result in a way. This is not that, okay, now we reached to this point, now we are guest in the pavilion, that's done. This is more of the kind of one of the kind of meeting points, and from there we kind of move on with many other kind of directions and collaborations, because also here ELCO is here in a framework of wider orientation trip, and there are many experts from Netherlands, and so we hope that this kind of momentum builds up for the future collaborations between artists, curators, critics, but also institutions.
Well, and I think it's really important to understand like the ripple effects of this as well. You know, like we're going to spend some time speaking about what does this actually mean, you know, within this sort of context of the exhibition. But as you've already said, like, you know, this occasion is also being like celebrated through like a visit of, you know, many people who are in this sort of audience this afternoon, myself included. And we're here this week to not only be here and to celebrate this, of course, but to also meet a lot of sort of artists in the city, visit institutions. And so I speak for myself when I say so the effects of that will come through in the long haul or on the short term. And so I think, yeah, beginning of like relationships, thankfully, can happen again in a space where we can meet physically, of course, and actually be here, which is so amazing. So I think, yeah, it needs to be also understood on very different levels and in a kind of layered model of what relationship building means on kind of a national level, of course, but also on a professional level.
Because actually before we started this panel, we were chatting with Kati, and then we kind of found out the fact that actually 2017 our pavilion was produced mostly or mainly in Netherlands, where Kati was studying at the time.
Maybe I can take it over from here. But thanks, Maria, and thank you, Nadia, for this intro. So, yeah, it's. I think that's the most institutional nowadays, like relations between Estonian and the Dutch art scene, where they like ever have been on the institutional level, but on like individual level. It's something that has been going on for a while. There's a generation of artists, graphic designers, curators, such as myself, who've been trained in the Netherlands. And yeah, when we were developing the pavilion, it mainly took place in Amsterdam, as Katja Novitskova, she became an artist there. She moved abroad, I think, about like 15 years ago already. And there's a strong connection, and also where I was doing the Apple and also working on the pavilion at same, it's sort of also thematically, it felt that it resonated so well in the Dutch context in a way that all these topics that I think we're also like addressing now throughout different projects, already then we sort of felt that it wasn't like, there was nothing about nation building. These are always quite like broad topics that can be in this sense in different pavilions. It doesn't have to be either Estonia or Dutch.
And actually, I mean, it might be a bit premature to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. In the process of doing this, have there been any revelations to you, either with regards to art itself or kind of intercultural exchange or nation building or institutions? Has there been anything of that sort?
Well, I guess in the context of our upcoming pavilion, then for sure, because also it roots back to the content-wise, it roots back to the Netherlands anyway, and we have a really big privilege to have also our two artists and curator here, so we could chat about it later. But then, yeah, so content-wise, it's somehow interesting to be placed within the Rietveld pavilion, within the kind of context of Dutch pavilion, and talk about the topic what we are talking about. But then there are also these kind of small revelations which we realize as a producers. It's like that now we have neighbors. Now we are part of this park, and usually in a city you are alone. You are like quite independently surrounded by, you know, Venice, but now we are in this park with neighbors, so having Belgium in one side and Finland in another side, which is also like actually super interesting kind of community feeling, which you maybe...
They are quite nice neighbors, okay.
I hope for them. not pushing the border like.
No, they're lovely neighbors. Don't worry.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess for sure, but I guess actually, to be honest, there are many things which we don't know yet because we're gonna go there in 5 months, and then I guess the actual understanding how it's gonna work. But I mean, also for us, I guess it makes it a bit different because Estonia, as I said before, it has been nomadic. So for us, I don't want to say it's just another house because it's not, because it's also so connected with invitation and another it's the Dutch Pavilion, it's not just a house, and it has its history, and we are now on a line of this history.
And there's the context of the Giardini itself.
Exactly.
You'll be the new country in the Giardini. That hasn't happened for a very,
exactly.
very long
So
time.
there are so many different contexts to kind of think of.
Just to ask, do you feel that you're moving into a more sort of institutionalized space?
For sure.
As
I
part of the
mean,
journey,
for
let's say?
sure, but I think that's not the way how we treat the kind of process, because I think the process we still treat in a way that really concentrating around the kind of current artistic team and thinking of the needs and the values there. So it's not, but I mean, obviously being aware of it, you are now you are the one-timer in this map.
Well, maybe institutionalized is not really the right word. It's also kind of the Giardini in that sense had such a long history, and to kind of reflect a little bit about what, kind of the Dutch sort of pavilion in the city kind of means, but also for you kind of, coming into this space. I think there's many different models in a way that have been sort of tried to kind of either decentralize or displace, or at the very least loosen up this kind of national model of sort of the pavilion. And yeah, I do think the Giardini is kind of set in its ways, let's just put it that way. And yeah, I'm very sort of curious what the experiences is going to be, of course, for these sort of artists moving into that space, but also for you as a kind of commissioner. What sort of the national pavilion as this kind of historical phenomenon feels and means somehow.
And I think also in a light of to kind of continue from there, which is the kind of question of national pavilion. I mean, Venice is based around of national pavilions. It's kind of national representation. I mean, these are the terms. The pavilions are commissioned actually by the state. So, and then it's state, asks the institutions to produce them. But also, I mean, now there is maybe we jumped too far, but also Nordic Pavilion, inviting Sami people to do their pavilion, and all those questions of nation states and how, opening up the doors and, not showing only, representations of the countries. Or this is actually really interesting and, contemporary question, and I think biennial also can't look away of it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there have been examples of sort of institute or nationalities trying to shake up the kind of traditional system of the Biennale. So in previous years, I think in one year the French and German pavilions, they swapped, and in one year the Finns wanted to actually leave their pavilion empty. They wanted Sami indigenous people and other indigenous peoples to be represented, and their idea was to leave their pavilion empty, and they would across the world find sites and kind of display their contributions that way, but they actually weren't allowed to do that. The Biennale said no. Do you think they should have been allowed to do that, to leave their pavilion empty? And if so, how would that affect the Biennale structure and the Biennale as an institution?
On my opinion, they should be allowed to do it, and as Nordic Pavilion should be allowed to name their pavilion Sami Pavilion, because you can't keep the structure not changing, even though I understand the biennial reasoning behind it, because this institution is really long and they have to keep their tradition and they can't shake it up constantly, having to, they need to work with 100 different countries and so on. But all in all, my personal opinion is that those things should be there, and
And also it's maybe interesting that, I don't know, it shouldn't maybe taken that seriously, like the Venice Biennial as an organization. What kind of question is that even, can you allow this or that to happen? Why not would be my first question. And then maybe it's from me and Maria's perspective, or Estonian perspective, that we've never been part of this big official narrative. We've never been inside Giardini. part of like old European sort of national presentation. So we are already more flexible in these terms. We are willing to get in when we're given this chance. We don't question it that much, but yeah, the broader question could be that why not? And there's the structure, how can we use the structure and take the most out of it, probably.
I wonder what would have happened if they were allowed to leave it empty. What would happen? How people would have perceived it? Because last time the Venezuelan pavilion was left empty because they couldn't get the work installed in time. Everybody simply walked past it. So that could have happened to the Finnish pavilion as well if they had left it empty.
I mean, yeah.
And every structure has its rules, and it's good if we try to fiddle around with them once in a while. But yeah, we also have to accept it's their party. We play through their rules to a certain extent.
I mean, my response to your question would be like a wholehearted yes. I think, if we even discuss this within the model of sort of a nation state, and to use a word that sort of aligns with that, I think, there's a sovereignty in a way which for me includes the right of like refusal, like to actually approach this space from a very different angle and to say, no, we do not sort of occupy this space and we'll leave it open, meaning if you leave something open, you leave it sort of undefined. What that does to sort of a practical experience of people walking in and having no clue what's happening, okay, but there will still be a sensation of space that will be kind of beyond the expectations that one might have. So to sort of destabilize, to kind of riff a bit off what you were saying, but we are approaching this question, I would say, on a very like spatial level. And I think if you look at even, let's say, not even the recent history, but the history of, let's say, presentations in the national pavilions of the last like 50, 60 years, the question of sort of national identity comes up of what is being considered a Dutch artist or an Estonian artist or a French, German, whatever artist. And I think, so on that level of like representation, let's say, there is interesting questions happening for a very long time. And to maybe also acknowledge, and I can speak from experience, having worked in sort of the Dutch art scene, where there's been a lot of like debate actually in the last like 30 years of what does it even mean to be Dutch and to be part of this structure. To acknowledge in certain type of sort of internationalism, of course, that happens in sort of art scenes, but also to, on that representational level, challenge the model within the model, perhaps, which is, a problematic position sometimes, but...
I mean, you've all basically answered that, the Finnish pavilion should have been allowed to leave it empty. But to just take this from the other direction, all institutions of all kinds are built on a certain number of traditions or values or core principles. If you get rid of those, I mean, what are you really left with? And I think this is a really interesting time to be discussing this because we're living through, right now, I think, a period of serious questioning of representation and reflection on representation and power. So how should institutions and traditional processes change? And are institutions like the Biennale really a relic of something in the past and, we shouldn't take them forward?
I think you'll always have power relations at some level. So a structure like the Venice Biennale, I wouldn't really call them a relic of old times because they're very much in the now. It was still one of the most important events on the art calendar. It still matters whether you're presented there or not, so I wouldn't necessarily call them a relic. And they will change. Everything changes in culture. And the discussion that we have about nations, we can only do that because there is a nation-state representation event like the Venice Biennale. It's the model in the model, as Hendrik said. But I think it's very easy to say this is a problematic situation, that organization is a relic, that's a problem, but we're very much taking part of it. We are part of that. Without us, there would be no Venice Biennale. But it works because everybody will go there. Everybody will make their selection, will put someone in the pavilion, and everybody will then discuss what that means. And that discussion is because it's there.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess my comment is also that I think institutions obviously need to change, they need to develop within their time in a way that you can't stay, obviously you have to, remember the kind of founding principles and so on, but you have to also reflect on time and take this step and challenge to be able to change, even if you're such a kind of massive institution or old institution, because otherwise you become a relic, and otherwise you don't reflect on times, and certain point, countries might not take part and so on. So I think there is the kind of fear of not changing is maybe short-sighted. And by that, I don't want to say that the biennial hasn't changed. It has changed over the years a lot, even over the past 10 years. So.
Well, I think the biennial is an institution with many heads. It's sort of a beast with many heads, perhaps. So the Arsenale, the Giardini, kind of everything that is sort of happening in the city. So it's a very sort of pluriform institution to begin with somehow. So I wouldn't want to sort of homogenize it too much in that sense. But, thinking about institutions and their change and really the moment of reckoning that is happening on sort of a global scale at the moment is something that I've thought through museum institutions a lot myself. So maybe kind of erring on the side of that a little bit here is to think about where does change happen, right? I mean, there's different sort of points of view. I've been a believer and have built my practice on thinking and hoping sometimes that sort of change can definitely happen from within an institutional sort of a context, but also not being naive about that is that you hit a lot of walls in that sort of process, and it's a process of sort of pushing through versus diplomacy, and it's not always the radical change that you're hoping for. Kind of another sort of standpoint could be these institutions need to be kind of dissolved, which is the radical sort of point of view, and sort of a change can only happen from the outside. The truth is in the middle somewhere. I do believe that, but I do also think that change can't only happen on a representational level. You could plaster the walls of any museum with the art that we would like to see at this moment, but sort of the organization might actually not change. So the question of institutional change within the model of national representation depends on the longevity of this thinking, which is something that sort of you've addressed in the beginning. Okay, what happens after sort of 2022, and how are we going to start rethinking this sort of model on a longer term? But also what will happen inside. And I think there's a lot of challenges being put by, I think, sort of the artists who are part of the sort of Estonian pavilion of thinking about certain histories, moments of reckoning, and really, what's the word that I'm looking for? It's not deconstructing, but trying to dissolve how we look at nation states and their sort of histories.
Do you think it's actually easier for countries on the outside to understand the history of another country? So with relation specifically to Estonia and the Netherlands, do you actually think there is some merit and there's an advantage of Estonia being an outsider to the Netherlands to address, for example, its colonial history? Or, to be a bit more specific, do you think Estonian artists can actually achieve this in a way that is perhaps fresher and more visionary than perhaps Dutch artists themselves?
Well, for sure, because I think there is no ties to it in a way that you can have a different look on it. But on the other side, you haven't lived it through, so you're always the outsider looking in a way. So I think it has two aspects. From one side, obviously, you have more independent look on it, and you can reflect it without any kind of, obviously with responsibility, but no ties. But the other side is being the observer or looking in, so it can go both ways.
I think it's quite nice. I mean, basically, in advance, we said, you can do whatever you like. We're not getting involved. We don't ask you to respond to us or to our situation. But in a way, it's quite nice when we heard what the plan was. I thought, well, it's not maybe not such a bad thing if Estonia is going to look at our colonial past instead of ourselves. They could have a fresher approach. They could also benefit from the fact that they're not part of that history. They can look at it from the side. When we do it ourselves, it becomes a very heavy, again, the word heavy, setup of the Dutch representation in Venice. So I'm quite looking forward to see how they will reflect on it. And that may actually help our discussion in the Netherlands as well. I can imagine.
Would you like to?
I think I haven't seen the pavilion yet, but I think it's interesting or like really intriguing that the Netherlands has such a strong colonial sort of past, or such a heavy past, and we don't share that historical sort of background. So there's this like moment of reflection where the sort of colonial legacy meets the sort of representation by those who've never been, who've always been colonized but never the colonizers. So it's intriguing that we are at that point in the history now with the pavilion.
I mean, I'd like to challenge this a little bit, if that's okay, because I do think, I want to make 2 points. The first is, of course, like moments of reckoning in that sense, whatever sort of history you may be sort of like relating to, aren't perhaps easy. And I hear the word sort of heavy being used a lot, like it's maybe sort of considered as, an issue that you have to sort of confront. But for myself and like for many sort of conversations I've had, also tried to approach moments of reckoning as really a kind of like, okay, what type of sort of change do we want to sort of enact, and really open it up for yourself somehow, and not say this is a sort of a problem that we have to deal with, but it's something that actually, helps us move forward in a way, and to kind of segue a little bit from that to, this question of sort of a colonial history and how, let's say, an Estonian contribution can look at that. And completely acknowledging that, like, the specificity of these histories are specific, right? In the sense, like, sort of the Dutch, let's say, a colonial history versus sort of the Estonian, how shall I say this, kind of chapter, let's say, where both have been in denial in a certain sense, like, like only very recently in sort of Holland was sort of the 17th century, like, switched from sort of the golden age to, acknowledging that it is a very different time and that wealth to this very day is built on exploitation as well. And of course, like, Estonia, as we have very much learned as a group this day, always having said, we have been colonized, so we do not sort of participate in the narrative of, let's say, historical sort of colonization. What binds the two is, the question of whiteness, right? And how to actually deconstruct whiteness in the specificity of your own sort of context, but also, within a Western model, within a European model, within a global sort of model as well. And that's why I think, this is such a beautiful thing happening, because it is in that space where sort of artists coming from a very different place and sort of history can come together to answer that sort of a question in a space where sort of the Netherlands has also, in the the past sort of contributions, has been trying to engage with that sort of a question as well, however slowly sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it is a kind of dark but sort of complementary pairing in a way between both countries. I mean, how different are the interests of both countries in their representation in the Biennale? They must be quite different. If I was to put that question to you, like, what would you say are the interests of the Dutch in the Biennale this next year?
Well, in a way, we would like to. We go to Venice to show that we're still here, and we have a very important art world in which very important themes are being discussed, and we take them to the platform of the Venice Biennale, in which we say to the rest of the world, yeah, we're still here. We're still part of the group of interesting countries on that field. For us, it's an international export possibility as well. And we showboat what we find most interesting and important of the Dutch cultural field.
And what about Estonia?
Well, I guess there is difference for sure. For example, when we play around with this idea, like who would step out of the biennial, like for example, if Dutch Pavilion would say that they don't take part, it has a one effect, whereas when Estonia would say it's kind of like this kind of power plays. But I think all in all, the main ambition is the same, to talk about, to show the like interesting, most amazing artists, the kind of urgency, to be part of the kind of international dialogue and to be in that platform through artists and, you know, amongst other artists to talk about urgent topics. So I guess these aims are the same, because I guess in that way Estonia and Netherlands work quite a similar way, that we don't necessarily show this kind of, let's say, established national representation way. We always work with a really different, at least from Estonian side, I can speak for Estonian side, we always work with a really, really different project. And it's really much about urgency more than this kind of best of, let's say. It is always best and so on, but it's the question of urgency when it comes to the pavilions. And it's more of thinking, yeah.
I think that's also what we were hoping for. That is also what I spoke about before, about the heaviness of the pavilion. It is the platform for the most important. And that is not always the best way to go about a really good presentation that has an impact. So that's also why we gave to the jury, we said, well, we're going to move from the Rietveld pavilion to another pavilion. Which artist is able to create an impact in that other different context? And then you don't get the question, who deserves the platform now? Who is the most important artist of the Netherlands? But it is which artist can bring something new and fresh and something that is connected to the now on the Dutch pavilion.
I have to say, if I may comment, and actually Hendrik can join in because you were also in a jury, I think because we got invited before we had a project, and then we had open call already knowing that we're going to be in Dutch Pavilion. But I think what was actually beauty and kind of things lining together was that Kristina Norman and Corina Apostol already had started to work with the project and the research, and invited Pete Aratsavi to join to apply for Venice. So it was kind of things lined up in a way. And actually, in the selection process, because we had a selection process of 2 phases, so first phase was the motivation letter, and second was already invited, or not invited, anyway, amongst 5 artists, so we didn't let ourselves be too blinded about the kind of location, the kind of giardini, and this kind of specific aspects in a way. It was still, the discussion was still about project and the content and the outcome. And again, I'm going to use the word urgency, obviously with the knowledge that it's going to be in a completely different context, and all this like Dutch Pavilion history, and this comes along with it, and we can't be naive or ignore it. But in a way, it wasn't actually the main discussion point, like how to achieve the most fitting project for the pavilion or for this occasion. It was like the research for the artist and curator had started already before. And then our open call came up, and then the discussion amongst the jury was also like...
No, it was sort of a balancing act in a way, of course. You know, you want to, kind of face the proposals at sort of face value in a way, like, okay, what is the most sort of a compelling plan, and what be kind of the most exciting and sort of like momentous to show in that sense, what sort of artists here are sort of doing at the moment. But I myself had a voice in my sort of the back of my head, like, you know, what would also be extremely meaningful and sort of relevant in that space. So it wasn't a leading question for me. As I said, it was kind of, you know, sort of dipping into that kind of, you know, back in the head sort of a question every now and then, because I do think this occasion, this kind of, you know, a transition, if you will, also kind of, you know, marks an opportunity to perhaps again to sort of consider that sort of shared space or that shared kind of interest in looking at certain histories and kind of sort of issues that may sort of connect Estonia and sort of the Netherlands in that sense. So yeah, it was really kind of a bit of both for me personally. So maybe I deviated from the brief too much, but yes.
Okay, well, this will be, I think, be my last question before I open up to questions on the floor. I know we can't go into too much detail at this point, but what can we learn about the artists chosen from both pavilions, both about the countries themselves, but also, I think, about the sort of the global moment we're living through?
You want to start?
You want to start? A lot? What can we learn? Well, we can, I mean, obviously, our project, Peter Atsavi, Kristina Norman, and Corina Postol, they're raising the questions which are out there, which are really, discussion points and so on. So, and if your question was more about what can we learn about the Estonian scene to understand for the international, then I guess here I need to go back to this, that the Estonian art scene it has its like a really wide plurality in a way. Kristina Norman has been already she was in Venice in 2009, representing Estonia with a really strong political statement. Now it's a beautiful dialogue and collaboration between Peter Atsavi and Corina Postol, so it's kind of collaborative project for Kristina going back to the Venice, continuing her practice, but building up, and then years later coming back with in a dialogue context with relevant topics in a way, but and what it tells about the Estonian scene. I mean, in here I would look at a bit more like longer historical, kind of throughout those 12 years where we have been there, to kind of treat it as a whole entirely. Like if you look this 12 years, it doesn't give you obviously the complete picture of Estonian scene, but it gives you at least the kind of short overview or insight what has been done, and there you could also see that it's like the variation is so wide, like as in every art scene, but also the kind of statements what artists come up with, the practices. There is you can't say that, this is Estonian art, or this is how it's done, or this is the topics discussed. It's kind of much wider.
No. I mean, we're obviously... Oh, pardon me. Sorry. I thought we were doing the official...
I'm very curious to see
please.
what you were going to say. Melanie Benayo, that is representing the Netherlands in April, she came up with her plans prior to the pandemic, but somehow it's very befitting, because it is all about how we deal with intimacy, how we deal with communication, with touch, with gender, with relations, with power struggles between relationships. And suddenly the pandemic came and those things became very apparent. We suddenly had to take a lot of distance to other people. So I'll be very curious to see how those reflections are being seen in post-pandemic times, hopefully post-pandemic times. But I think also in the end it's going to be one big party in the pavilion. And I think that somehow could only happen because we went to a different place. So I hope we'll take that with us to the future as well. Sorry, you wanted to add something, Hendrik?
No, yeah. No, it's just like of course we're here this afternoon to celebrate something, but it's also not like a sort of how to say it, let's say, a kumbaya moment or something, because, central to all of this, we're sort of in the orbit, I feel, of these two artists who, and I have seen the plans and I've spoken to them in a very sophisticated and deeply researched way, or thinking about notions of privilege and access and what that means, vis-a-vis a certain history or a certain space, or however they sort of approach that. And I think in the context of Venice, which is a space so determined by those notions, actually, that is something that, we can learn from them, and I am really looking forward to it as well. And also what we can learn from this kind of in the long term, perhaps in the sort of context of what we've spoken about, is how the fabric of these spaces can change by doing things like this. And, change on the level of representation, but also actually change and what that means, and to sort of consider that.
On that note, I think I'm going to open up questions to the floor. I'm supposed to ask somebody whether there are questions come through on an app that's been used. Marika, is there any questions? There are no questions, okay. We have a roving mic over there. If you put your hand up, then the mic will come to you. Don't be shy.
Just a quick question. I don't think we talked about, given that the Dutch are not going to be in the Rietveld Pavilion, where will they be? Where can people find the Dutch Pavilion?
The Missa and Cordia, the church up north in Venice.
There was another hand that went up over here, I think.
Thank you. In terms of the timeliness in making this decision on the Dutch side, I wonder if this also comes in some ways in the wake of the last Pavilion, which so much interrogated, from a black perspective, modernism and modern abstraction, and really dealt with the modernist architecture of the Pavilion. And I wonder if that also conditioned the decision to take a pause at this point in time.
No, it's not a reaction to the previous presentation, if that's what you mean. I would say it's a reaction to the discussions that always surround every presentations in Venice, and how they are being discussed. Also how we bring our own discussions to Venice, and how we then present our discussions there. It was also a reaction to that, but not necessarily to the previous presentations.
Hi. Hi, I'm Corina. I'm the curator of the Estonian Pavilion. I just wanted to make like a slight correction to something that was said earlier, and because you were talking about the content of our proposal, and actually we are especially dealing with the entangled histories of colonialism between Estonia and the Netherlands, and our project is exactly looking at how somebody who's coming from a colonized context here in Estonia can become a colonizer themselves in a foreign land, and what does that mean, and also what are the repercussions of these choices that the central character in our pavilion, Emily Saal, has made. Do you want to say something also?
Yes, exactly. We are trying with our project to kind of dissolve this boundary between the colonized and the colonizer, and to show that how one and the same person in one situation is the colonized, and in another one uses her privilege of being white and being in the Indonesian Dutch colony a colonizer, and is being able to realize herself professionally due to the fact that she's a white woman and married to an Estonian writer who we all know in Estonia, and who made a choice to work exactly for the Dutch colonial army as an officer, participating directly in the colonial violence that took place in the colony, and also that yes, we want to show exactly that, to say that Estonian history is all about being victims of different colonial rules is not correct, because there are, besides this biography that we're looking into, there are other similar biographies that can be found in different parts of the world, different colonial contexts, and also when we think of our own history, different periods, historical periods in Estonia, then this situation has never been super black and white, and not going too far back in history, looking into the Soviet period, then there are so many people today who remember this period as very diverse, and the role of the Estonian population in that period also has been very diverse. And of course, it makes sense to look further back in history, in the beginning of the 20th century and to the 19th century, and also find a very sophisticated picture there of these relationships.
Thank you. Any other questions? Right, somebody over there.
Thank you very much for this really exciting conversation, and I also want to congratulate Netherlands Pavilion for doing such a strong move, which is, when you think about it, it's amazing that till now only this attempt to bring Sami people into Finnish pavilion or for the Nordic pavilion has been the kind of attempt to break into this state of being privileged or having access to this prominent place as a Giardini. I just wanted to ask a kind of maybe a fun question about as this move is politically and socially and conceptually kind of really strong. So is there no fear of artists that this move itself would start to compete with the work?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last bit.
Oh, yes, the last bit was that a bit like kind of provocative question, as this act itself giving up the pavilion, the Rietveld built pavilion of Netherlands in Giardini is so strong, so is there no fear of artists that this act itself would start competing with the actual art project?
Is there no artist
Did
that...
you get, maybe, I think if I understood you correctly, the question was this kind of radical act of giving up the pavilion, yes. that is such a strong action, that action in itself would compete with the art that's going on.
I hope not. That's also why we're here at the moment, because we said we want to pay attention to this exchange now. In April, we also simply want to pay attention to what is to be seen in the Dutch pavilion and what is to be seen in the Estonian pavilion. And I'm sure the narrative will be a part of that, but I'm also going to assume that the artists themselves will be able to present to such a level that it will be about their work and not necessarily only about the exchange.
And also to add up to it, it was also kind of, if you thought our own line of the communication, how it has been so far. So actually the content of the both pavilions, they have got really lots of interest and focus there. But for like maybe institutional level, actually that's why we thought to have this moment here. Initially we thought to talk more about actually cultural relationships between Netherlands and Estonia. Then we somehow still was like driving towards the Venice and actual upcoming pavilions and so on. But to kind of have this momentum now, and I think from here we're gonna now move to the actual, like, both Vita's and Christina's project and Melanie's project, and then talk about already the content and the concepts, and so.
And I think that Melanie Bonayo is quite able to be radical all by herself. She doesn't need us.
Yeah. Do we have any more questions? Okay, there are two actually over there.
Yeah, hello, thanks for a nice discussion. It's rather a remark that I think in the architecture pavilion, actually the Rietveld pavilion once was empty, so it was presented just as an architecture. But my question would be that, you know, a favor always needs a favor back, so what did it Dutch? What do you expect back from this trade?
We don't, well, as I said, trying to say is that we don't expect something back. We also said we don't want anything in return. But because what we get in return is the situation that will be there for us. And that is hopefully a lot that we will get back from that.
And I think just one last question. There was somebody else who had their hand up.
Yeah, it's a kind of a question, kind of a comment. We talked earlier, or you talked earlier about the Biennale as an institution with its traditions, that it's kind of trying to hold together. It's an extremely prestigious event, but it's also an extremely privileged event. Anybody connected with it or organising it or takes part in it are extremely privileged, in my opinion. And with that comes responsibilities. Given the condition that the world is in today and the problems that we have, which are many, but there are two outstanding ones at the moment, should curators and galleries and the people that are organising this, shouldn't they simply be focusing on artists and work and projects that are dealing with those problems directly at the moment? Because we're in serious shit at the moment, and who cares what the institution, the Biennale institution, thinks about swapping over and changing program? Who cares? If they can't handle that, then they don't deserve to continue as an institution. We should be leading them in directions that we need, not be controlled by the Biennale as an institution. What do you think about that?
Any comments?
No, I mean, many. We could talk about this for a long time. I mean, yes, understanding that if an institution can deal with change, that they become superfluous, yes. I mean, I completely agree with that. I also, think that the Venice Biennial is a space of privilege, sort of absolutely, and are there other things that one can focus on? But I mean, I also don't want to put kind of a major event for artists into that space of ultimate sort of relativity in a way. This is also bringing artists actual opportunities, money as well, actually, to make a work that then goes from that a prestigious stage back into a lot of different other spaces, actually. I think the longer term, so I always want to kind of shift the focus away from this moment that, Venice and an X amount of people get to see it, but it often goes back to kind of the home countries, and the artists, get to show their work actually that they've made for that space in multiple venues along the way. So I do think it has value in that sense to continue to invest in a space like that. Should it change? Yes. If it won't change, should we reconsider it? Also, yes, of course. But I think change is happening, absolutely. May I add one more thing? I think what is really something to consider as well is this Arsenale exhibition. Talk about a space of ultimate privilege that a lot of artists actually don't have access to because they're not represented by some blue chip gallery. Yes, that's also something that we should address, and I think that hasn't been given the attention it deserves. So yeah, sorry, you've tapped into a great frustration of mine in that sense as well, but also something that I think deserves a lot of conversation.
Ilko, you were going to say something, were you?
No, he said it really quite well.
Okay.
I thought.
They're so polite, aren't they?
No, but I think if an organization or a platform doesn't change, it becomes obsolete at some stage. So it will change, or it will become obsolete. And then something else will come up, will take that place, and that will then be a very prestigious and privileged place. There will always be places of privilege because they have gained some importance, and quite often that comes from a certain change as well. But I would say that if the Biennale or any other institution doesn't change, at some stage it will become obsolete.
Okay, I think at this point I'm going to hand over to Ilko, who will say a few words about the handover. But first of all, thank you very much for a provocative and stimulating discussion. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here and to share it with us. And in the end, that is one of the great things about this journey that we started more than 1.5 years ago in giving Maria a call and asking, would you like to have our pavilion? And the great thing what that brings is that we, as we just discussed, we are going through a process of change. Things will be different in a year's time than they were to now. And we've come sort of brothers or sisters in that change. And that we will carry with us. We'll have a bond from now on in this particular decision. And that has already led to this visit here. We've been very welcomed by you all in your institutions. It's been great to get some insight in your background, in your history, in the context in Estonia here. And I'm very much looking forward to taking that further to Venice and to beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you for allowing me to say a few words on behalf of the Dutch government. And the timing of this celebration is impeccable. In the year where we celebrate 100 years of diplomatic relations between Estonia and the Netherlands, it's wonderful to see that the strong cooperation that we have between the two countries is only getting stronger and more diverse. The international cultural policy of the Netherlands is to support bilateral relations through cultural exchanges, to create a strong position abroad for Dutch culture, and to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals through culture. But international cultural cooperation is something that we cannot do by ourselves. Besides the Netherlands, it requires at least one other partner. And in this case, I'm very happy that the other partner is Estonia. It is a cross-border effort that can only succeed and have maximum impact if we work together and learn from each other. Sometimes traditions need to be broken, and you need to step out of your comfort zone in order to achieve this. Already the past few years, the Estonian exhibitions in Venice were considered the most interesting and innovative. Renewal is essential for the cultural sector to thrive, also for an event such as the Biennale. By allowing new ideas to come to the surface, we ensure continuous development of the cultural sector. I am certain that Estonia will be very successful at making the most out of the Rietveld Pavilion in 2022. And already this cooperation between the Netherlands and Estonia will make the 59th edition of the Biennale a very interesting and very special one. It is therefore my pleasure and honor to, together with Mr. van der Lingen, hand over the Rietveld Pavilion to Estonia for the Biennale in Venice next year. And I wish you the best of luck.
Wow. Okay. Wow, aitäh, thank you. Yes, this is quite something to hold. I must say I'm very, very happy. But onwards with the speech. Honorable Deputy Head Mission Iris de Groot, dear diplomats, honorable guests from the Netherlands, dear Estonian art world, dear artists, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to be here today with all of you to celebrate this wonderful event of true collaboration and trust between our two countries. Joined this year also by the centenary of diplomatic relations, we are of comparable size, but quite different. Our two art scenes are equally unique and at the same time part of the wider global reality. I would like to express my sincere and deep gratitude to the people of Netherlands, to the Dutch art world, and the Mondrian Foundation. The gesture of inviting Estonia to hold our next national pavilion in the Venice Biennale in your historic Rietveld Pavilion building is truly generous. We are sincerely happy and extremely proud of our artists to have won your attention, appreciation, and trust in the previous years and decades. Thank you. Dear artists and organizers, in these challenging times, in difficult years behind us, your working conditions have greatly suffered. Yet you all give us hope and motivation to carry on and work even more closely together. On behalf of the Ministry of Culture, let me assure you, we value highly your commitment to and hard work for creating worlds and possibilities, for dreaming big and not giving up, even in difficult and ever-changing circumstances. I am truly honored for the opportunity to be part of this historic continuity and to receive this literal piece of history. Of course, politicians, diplomats, ministries, officials make things happen by creating a wider environment as supportive as possible for the culture. However, the magic in art happens only thanks to people in the art field, to the artists and to the organizers. Therefore, the responsibility and opportunity goes with the Center of Contemporary Arts of Estonia and, of course, its director, Maria Arusa, to start the final phase of preparation of our next pavilion. I wish you all inspiration and good luck with the respective projects. Let us hope to meet again in an even happier and hopefully much larger gathering in Venice already in 5 months. I hope we will all have a nice party there. So, thank you.
And I would also like to thank, first of all, Elko and Mondrian Fund for the trust. And I have said it already several times, but I think what makes it the most moving is that this trust is for our Estonian artists, for all the 12 editions that has been there, all these amazing projects, all the organizers, all the curators. I'm happy also to see you here. And it's really, really great privilege, but also a really big challenge for our upcoming pavilion and Orchidearium, and we are happy and excited to be there. So I would also like to point out our artistic team, Corina Apostol, Peter Atsavi, and Kristina Norman. And actually Aet is also here with us, Aet Tader, who is our architect, who was really happy to receive this maquette because now we can actually start to play around with it. But all in all, we are happy and honored, but I think the biggest thing is this trust, and it's going to build up on many different collaborations on top of that. So thank you, and see you in Venice. And now we're going to actually see the performance of Jüri Ojaver.
Давид Тухманов, стихи Роберта Рождественского «Олимпиада». Поет Тынис Мяги.
И зовет олимпийский огонь золотой. Будет земля счастливой и молодой. Нужно сделать все, чтобы олимпийский огонь не погас. Солнце стартует в небе, как первый раз.
Еще до старта далеко, 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 но проснулась Москва посередине праздника, посреди земли. Ах, как шагают широко, широко, широко по восторженным улицам королевы плавания, бокса короли. Сегодня никуда от спорта не уйдешь, от спорта нет спасения. А стадион гремит, как будто подошла волна землетрясения. У стадиона 100 раз повторит дальняя даль. Солнце в небесах горделиво горит, будто медаль.
И зовет олимпийский огонь золотой. Будет земля счастливой и молодой. Нужно сделать все, чтобы олимпийский огонь не погас. Солнце стартует в небе, как первый раз. Этот яркий день мы надолго-надолго запомним с тобой. Будет земля счастливой и молодой.
Москва просторна, над нею, над нею, над нею в небе флаги плывут, словно разноцветная стая облаков. Сегодня лучше и добрее, добрее, добрее станет все человечество. В спорте есть соперники, в спорте нет врагов. Сегодня никуда от спорта не уйдешь, от спорта не исправиться. Сегодня на земле прибавится тепла и радости прибавится. У стадиона 100 раз повторит дальняя даль. Солнце в небесах горделиво горит, будто медаль.
И зовет олимпийский огонь золотой. Будет земля счастливой и молодой.